when I stumbled into the experience of aphantasia or mind blindness, which is something that it's a part of the way that my mind works. I do not have the ability to visualize. My thoughts and my thinking is more like a stream of consciousness that describes thinking rather than seeing images. So if people see images and you can consider that like a picture, the way that I think is more like the bits of data of that picture saved onto a laptop or a phone. It's the descriptors, right? Or maybe a better way to frame it is if people think in terms of movies, pictures, I think in terms of the script. So ever since I was introduced to this idea, I was hit with this really dramatic perspective change. And the perspective change is what I really would hope I can convey to other people. It's this crazy realization that in everybody's head, right, the way that every single person is experiencing the world that we think is universally shared, everybody is interacting with it in a significantly different way, to a point where our perception of the reality of everything around us is vastly different. And I just found a clip of Richard Feynman actually talking about this, and it lended some credibility to this observation that I've made. And he talks about how he stumbled into this perspective accidentally. He was running some experiments and decided to try something. So he was trying to understand individual perception of time. And he started out by counting to 60, trying to see how close to the 1 minute calibration sense of time he could be. So he would count 1, 2, and so once he got to consistently, he tested, and this was like sort of his baseline. Once he counted to 48, that was the minute mark. So if he counted to 48, that would be 1 minute. And then he said he got curious about, he started realizing, as he was doing the counting, he could do other things. And so, you're counting, in your head, right? You think about, you could easily walk around and do whatever. But he became more interested in what he couldn't do, and that's important. So he would test this out. He wanted to see if, while he was counting, he could also read, or while he was counting, he could also count the rows in a column or something like that. And what he found was, since he was counting, right, and the way that he does it, he's counting in his head, 1, 2, 3, 4 in his head. So the counting machine was already in use. And so when he went to go try and count the number of words in a paragraph, right, he couldn't do that because the counting operation was already happening. And so through sort of a trial and error kind of test experiment here, he found a way to create symbols that he could then quickly add up while he was counting to get the answer. But he became struck by this idea. But then that idea of there being things that you cannot do while he was counting stuck with him. So then he realized he would not be able to speak. So he could count up, he could read and count up numbers in a column while he wrote or while he was counting, but there was no shot that he was going to be able to speak, because the same faculty of his mind that he uses to speak was being used to do the counting, in the same sense that I experience it, where if I'm counting, I'm using my inner monologue. And I think, just as a side note, one of my biggest challenges is when I'm speaking, my inner monologue can't operate simultaneously, or at least not right now. Maybe this is something that I can develop. So I run into issues where if I'm asked a challenging question up front, I need to sit and be able to think it out and then speak it. And it's suboptimal, to say the least. So where this gets very interesting is Feynman takes it. There was another professor at Princeton at the time, and he takes it to this professor and tells him about what he's been doing. And immediately that professor goes, well, that's impossible. How could you do that? How could you count up the number of words in an article while you're counting in your head? But interestingly, he said it would be very easy to count in your head and speak at the same time. And so Feynman puts him through this little experiment test. They find his baseline in 1 minute. It was 52 seconds. So at 52 seconds, that was the 1 minute. And so the person, they do it, they find that baseline, and then he starts going. He goes, what do you want me to talk about? I can talk about anything, blah, 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 boom, 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 boom. And he continuously talks for 52, and he hits the 52. And so they described what the process was going on while they were doing these things. And for this other professor, in his mind, what's happening is there's a ticker going tick, 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 counting seconds, right? It's a very visual way of counting. And so he's just keeping track of the ticks, which is contrast. And so since that's a very imagery centric way of counting, speaking is that's a possibility for him. So it's hard to express, and this is exactly why it's hard to express just how different the perspectives, individual to individual, really are. We are experiencing things in a completely different way. And it explains so many things. And this gets into a whole, it becomes a very interesting field to study, because it touches why some people are able to grasp things so much easier than others, or why certain people tend to have strengths in one area and weaknesses in another. And this very practical, how do you experience the world? What are you doing? Describe what is going on in your head while these things are happening. That's just not part of any of the conversations that we're having today. And so if you think about communication or society, like the way that we interact with everybody, communication serves to create this universal understanding of the world, but we're totally neglecting the origins of communication, like that baseline that helps us create a universal understanding. We're not exploring that. So it's just all very interesting.